Alongside the likes of Lord of the Rings and Back to the Future, The Godfather is one of the most iconic and legendary movie trilogies out there. It was so well written, so well directed, so well musically composed, and so well acted. Therefore, I thought I'd see if the tie-in games live up to that almost insurmountable reputation. But before we get into all that, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. Without further ado, let's go. The majority of people that I speak to seem to have come to the consensus that the second supersedes the first when it comes to The Godfather. But I fall into the other camp that believes that nothing can beat the original. It's without a doubt my favourite movie of all time. Feels much more like a complete package with Michael's character arc throughout the film. Whereas Part 2 feels slightly more all over the place. The flashbacks to Vito's past feel slightly out of place to me. Not that I didn't like it, but it just feels a bit tacked on. Personally, I believe they could have just made that a separate prequel, but clearly they decided against it. While the first two are unanimously praised, The Godfather Part III gets criticised for so many reasons, some of which are valid. But something certainly not lacking is the effort Al Pacino puts to carry this whole movie with his incredible acting. Dude's back must be G-O-N-E gone. While the whole series showcased his talents, acting opposite Sofia Coppola, who lacked any sorts of acting chops, seemed to highlight the actor's brilliance all the more.
Dad?
The Godfather games were all developed by EA Redwood Shores, or Visceral Games as it was known as until the studio's closure in 2017, who are most commonly recognized for their work on the Dead Space trilogy. That alone should be an indicator as to the capability of the devs. Let's see if they managed well, because to me, The Godfather is a massive name to live up to. While technically called The Godfather Part I, the 2006 game's protagonist is neither Vito nor Michael Corleone. The game follows Aldo Trapani, a recruit of the family, as he goes on the quest to avenge his father's death. It follows a similar timeline to the film, so there are points where events intersect. However, Aldo's motivations differ slightly from the immediate family, so we're able to get another perspective on the events and other going-ons in and around the family on the Don's watch. I always find that when tie-in games get creative like this, The Warriors and Scarface, it makes for a better all-around game because you're not just retreading old ground. Aldo's character creator is reasonably detailed for its time, for a title that isn't an RPG, since that's the sort of game that generally has a character creator in them. The gameplay adopts a fascinating combat system where you lock onto Aldo's target with L1 but punch by flicking the right analog stick in the direction of your target. Pull it back before you push it forward to land a more powerful hit. You can grab your enemies too by hitting R1 when locked onto someone to throw them into something to inflict environmental damage. This can be useful when intimidating people as well. The intimidation aspect was the big gimmick of the Godfather game when it was first released. It makes people realize that they're being given an offer that they can't refuse by being physical with them or damaging their property to prove that you deserve a cut of their money for protecting their businesses. Extorting them by doing this is necessary to take over rackets in the area, which can in turn get you a share of the profits and earn you enough respect to level up. The money you earn can be used to bribe crooked police officers, which can help you get away with crimes or purchase upgrades to your weapons. While there are upgrades you can do to your existing stats when you get more respect, they're not majorly unique and may as well not have been there. Aldo can progress up the hierarchy in his mob career in the Don's family as he gets more and more entangled with the family's affairs. As he does so, he'll become increasingly involved in gunfights. When it comes to the gunplay, hit square to hide behind cover. You can disarm an enemy by shooting their right shoulder, or stop them in their tracks by popping their kneecaps, or just pop them in their head if you feel like it. I feel like they nailed the world's atmosphere. The weapons, the cars, the newspaper flying all over the place really felt era appropriate. It's Speaking of the cars, driving from meeting to meeting and mission to mission throughout the game, I can't help but notice it's a quite bit more responsive in comparison to other GTA clones of the time, such as the Getaway. Now, speaking of GTA, there are Vendetta and Heat levels you should be wary of, similar to that of a Wanted level in a Grand Theft Auto game. The Vendetta level increases when taking over a rival gang's rackets and killing their men, which can cause an all-out mob war that can only be stopped in one of two ways. Either bomb a rival family's business or bribe an FBI agent to distract the rival gang until your Vendetta level drops. But Heat acts almost identical to the Wanted system found in GTA. If you're seen shooting at rival gang members in public, police, or innocent civilians, then your Heat will increase, which will lead to police shooting at your direction on sight. That's when the aforementioned paying off police officers can come in handy. Now on to the Godfather Part II that was released and set 3 years after the first game. As it was developed by the same company, brilliantly, the sequel continues with this perspective and makes for a more interesting experience overall. You're attached to new characters you met in the same way you are to the characters from the film, but a lack of knowledge as to what could happen to these people adds an air of tension and unpredictability, and for good reason. The Godfather Part II starts you off in the shoes of the first game's protagonist's protege, Dominic. After his mentor's tragic murder, Dominic is tasked with the Corleone family's operations in New York City. Similar to the first game, they go through some of the main story beats of the film, but I'm glad they opted against using the rise of Vito Corleone, which I think allowed the story and the game as a whole to flow a lot better. However, the second one seemed to include the protagonist in these scenes a lot more and change the way some of the scenes played out. Personally, I preferred the first game's storytelling methods of keeping Aldo lurking more in the background and letting the story play out exactly as it did in the movie, as opposed to Part 2 giving Dominic a more central role and altering an already perfect story a little. Despite it not being the worst thing on earth, I prefer not to break my headcanon by seeing him in a scene he obviously wasn't in the film. The marketing for this game was interesting to say the least. A month before the release, in March 2009, EA launched a Facebook app. Remember those? It was called The Godfather 2, Crime Rings, and had the sole purpose of promoting the actual Godfather 2 video game. The premise of the game was based on the crime ring mechanic from the experience it was made to advertise. You were able to create a mobster, join one of the 5 main families in the game, take over rackets and build crime rings that eventually led you to becoming the Don. Unfortunately, when I searched for the game on Facebook, I can't find it, so it seems like it's not available to play anymore. Upon the release of the game, EA sent out some brass knuckles to journalists so they can promote the game. However, they failed to take into account the fact that brass knuckles are illegal to own in several states. After realizing their mistake, they were forced to request that everyone that received brass knuckles to return them. The failed attempt of these two marketing maneuvers likely majorly impacted the sales of the game despite the big name pull of The Godfather. Although it wasn't just the marketing, honestly it's a shame, but there were no improvements to the gameplay in the second game either. I get it. With immediate sequels, there generally aren't too drastic overhauls in the gameplay department. But slight improvements are necessary once feedback's taken on board from the first installment, and The Godfather Part II unfortunately lacked that. As previously mentioned, there was a crime ring system that was implemented. This entailed a multi-business crime ring that, when all of which are taken over, the player is given a gameplay boost such as bulletproof vests and armoured vehicles. But to be honest, it just didn't do enough for me, because realistically speaking, it isn't that much different from the upgrades you gain from the increased respect you get from taking over businesses in the first game. Also, the open world is less aesthetically unique, as there's no era-appropriate newspaper flying about the streets, and thus it feels a lot more like a generic cartoony open world title, which works against it given the title it's based off of. Therefore, I have to say I prefer the first game, just like I prefer the first film. Although the squad mechanic, whereby you can instruct a group of made men to do your bidding for you, is cool and a welcome development from the first game, where a random group of men from the Corleone family has your back whenever you enter conflict. The fact that they have unique skill sets such as arson and demolition, an upgrade path, and the ability for them to climb the ranks from soldato to underboss is a detail I honestly wasn't expecting, but I'm glad was present. As opposed to working your way to the top like you were in the first game, you are at the top and you manage the family. But this difference ultimately felt inconsequential, with the gameplay loop of taking over and defending businesses becoming repetitive, especially because that's exactly what the first game had you doing. Overall, when it comes to the gameplay, I don't like this point of view, because it sounds slightly derogatory, especially to me, someone who hasn't necessarily grown up playing the PS2 trilogy. But both games do fall into the bracket of a Grand Theft Auto clone, in the sense that there is an open world sandbox where you have the freedom to do as you please. And it could be a disappointment to find out that neither game has Al Pacino's likeness, especially when the Scarface title that released around the same time did. The second installment didn't perform quite as well commercially, by selling around 250,000 copies on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in the first month of its release, with the original selling over 1 million copies for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC in the first 3 months after its release. While obviously the 3 months time frame of the sales of the first one is 3 times larger than the month given for the sales of the second one, the initial sales upon the release tends to be the highest it gets to. So even if you're generous and you times it by 3 and get 750,000 sales, it's still reasonably less. And with the third clearly being the black sheep of the trilogy and many people considering The Godfather as a duology, it's understandable why they wouldn't have been overly keen on making a game for the third installment anyway. This just sealed the deal. A lot of people dislike it, so they wouldn't have thought they would have sold many copies, and I wouldn't imagine that they'd be wrong to think like that. So, to be honest, they probably were right to cancel the sequel. Thanks so much for watching. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video, comment your thoughts and subscribe for more retrospectives and video essays like this. See ya!